Uh, as Rhonda said, I'm Susan Fowler. I'm an ESU Slim grad of 93 and '05. '05 is when I earned my Certificate of Legal Information Management. That was the cooperative uh, course between, or coursework between SLIM and the KU School of Law. And as my mentor in that and the director at KU Law Library said, we will teach you how to think like an attorney. And I said, no, Rob, that's scary, in jest, of course. But that's exactly what that certification work did. I learned to think within the law. That is a big leap because the law is a paradigm unto itself. Once you understand that, everything falls into place and it makes sense. So with me today are two of my favorite attorneys. I'm not saying that just because I managed to rope them into this. They really are. Laura Miser is Assistant Lyon County Attorney, and
Hi.
Jeremy Dorsey is, wave, Laura. And Jeremy Dorsey is with Kansas Legal Services, Emporia. He's also current president of the Lyon Chase County's Bar Association and a member of the Emporia District US 253 School Board. And we won't even put him on the spot for that. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll try to get to those. That's what Rhonda gets to do. She gets to help us with that. And I'm going to try to find my cursor, move this little box over here. What brought this about was this spring when I voluntarily sent myself home. I actually managed the law library for Lyon County under contract, and I've done that for over 17 years. So I sent myself home in mid-March, just about the same time the state Supreme Court shut down the district courts, and our Lyon County commissioner shut down the courthouse. So it was really good timing. And my chief judge emailed me and said, you're not coming back till we tell you you can. And they have kind of said that's okay, but reality is there's really no need, and the legal community is not in any hurry to reopen physically. So we've been providing virtual services. And in that time in my home office, which has been fully equipped for 26 plus years as a contract employee type, I took some courses, one of which was this Creating Pathways to Civil Legal Justice from Webb Junction. Then this is geared toward public librarians. I mainly wanted to see what they were telling public librarians, because what you all may not have known if you're in the public library field, the state Supreme Court issued an administrative order last year directing courts to, if people wanted legal information, they were directing them to send these people to public libraries. And I thought that was pretty unfair. So I'm glad to see they did this course. I was even happier to see the quality of the curriculum. I thought it was outstanding. The good part is, well, you all will probably be sending them to me, and there's larger issues that come forth, of course, because, well, first of all, let's address what is an access to justice gap. We have in our country about 60 million Americans living in the poverty level. I would venture there's more than that because of our current pandemic and losing jobs, some of which will never come back. But of the people in poverty or low-income households, the 71 represents the percent of the low-income households that experience at least one civil legal problem in the past year. 71%. Now, 86 is the percent of civil legal problems faced by low-income Americans in a given year that receive either inadequate or no legal help. 60 million Americans, 86% of their civil legal problems receive inadequate or no legal help. And then 20% of the civil legal problems that low-income Americans seek help for are typically child custody, which is 48%, and wills and estates. Even though we have a mandate against evictions in regard to losing one's job because of the pandemic, one can still be evicted if one hasn't paid one's bills. So I think we're going to see more cases for evictions. There's going to be more civil type cases or situations that people will be looking for help for if you haven't already seen them in your libraries. So how can we help? Well, we can help people learn how to access legal information, and we can help them find low cost or free professional legal assistance. But we cannot practice law without a license. For one thing, we cannot interpret the law. And I tell patrons, self-help, you'll hear the term self-help, self-represented, pro se, all of them mean the same thing. Someone who is seeking to handle their case themselves, represent themselves. I tell people in that situation all the time, they don't want me to interpret the law for them because I am not an attorney. But I've even seen attorneys who happened to be in the law library when our doors were open. Those people from the public would turn to one of my attorneys and they'd say, well, because then there may not be unauthorized practice of law, but it could be malpractice. This is why attorneys are very careful before they answer a question for you. There's a lot of respect for handling the information correctly. So we cannot interpret the law. We can't tell someone how to interpret the law. We cannot tell someone how to apply the law. And believe me, patrons will do all kinds of gymnastics to try to get us to do that for them. So next question is, but is information enough? Is handing someone a packet of information, forms to fill out, is that enough? Well, I maintain it isn't, and I've had this thought for a long time because the legal system is complex. There are exceptions, I will grant you that, but it is very easy to give up rights that you may not be aware of if you don't have a full grasp of the situation. So understanding the legal system is can be challenging by itself. But then representing yourself requires specialized skills. You need to be familiar with the language. The language that the legal system uses, and we are moving toward common English, but not very quickly. It comes from ancient Rome. That's where we get our Latin phrases, old France. It's a voir dire or voir dire. I mean, you're going to hear both. Old English, and then you mix that all together, and that's Black's Law Dictionary. We need to know how to communicate with judges and attorneys. Again, the law is a paradigm unto itself, and there is a logical structure for how to present a case. So how do we fill this access to justice gap? The number one driving factor for people seeking to represent themselves is poverty. So how do we overcome poverty? We need to get our policymakers and people in economic development on board, education, mental health, social workers, law enforcement. We need everybody at the table. Libraries, of course, I put us in there. The faith community is another good access point, especially for disseminating information. And then the court system. So people don't necessarily have to come straight to the court system. Maybe we can intervene before that situation gets there. So while we were thinking about this and let's develop a community approach, we're going to start small. And so I reached out to some people, namely Laura and Jeremy, because expungements is part of what KLS does. But Laura came up with this. This is something she's been thinking about. So I will just let her go forth with this, if that's okay.
Thank you, Susan. So this COVID pandemic is kind of what got me starting thinking about expungements. I know that Kansas Legal Services have done what's called expungement drives in our community before. And for some reason or other, they just don't, not through lack of their efforts, but the response doesn't seem to be as large as what I would have assumed it would be. I would have thought people would have tried to take more advantage of that situation. And I don't know if it's just because of some of the barriers we're going to talk about in a little bit, or just apathy. I don't know. But anyway, COVID got me talking or thinking about expungements because of the financial barriers that people are facing. And we have quite a bit of industry here in our town. And so I know there are some places that will hire felons and there are some places that will not. There's also people that I know that are out there that have the right to have their convictions expunged, but for some reason or another, they just don't. And that can be a barrier to them, number one, either getting a job, number two, getting a better job, or maybe getting a promotion where they're currently employed. And with everything else going on financially, it just got me to thinking that these people don't, a lot of people don't need any more working against them than what is happening because of this pandemic and the result on people's financial situations. So that's kind of why it came to my mind. And also I had read about Leavenworth County did an expungement drive up there, and it through their prosecutor's office. And I got to wondering, why can't we do the same thing here in Lyon County? And so I spoke with my boss, kind of got his blessing that I would try to start the ball rolling. I just didn't really know where to start. So I reached out to Susan because she's very active in the community. She's got her ear to the ground on a lot of issues, and she has a lot of knowledge. And obviously her tech skills will come into play a lot as well. And so that's kind of how it started.
Jeremy, you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. If you ever get people who are interested in expungements, whether they're low income or not, some people think just Kansas Legal Services is legal aid, therefore we only help poor people. That's not necessarily true. Most of them are by most standards poor, but there's a lot of other grants, special grants for elderly people, grants for people who might be victims of crime. So there's all these different sources of funding. So don't think that, okay, this kid looks well off, still give them our number. We have a 1-800 number that, let me back up. So when you apply for services with us, you're going to call a 1-800 number that goes to an intake center in Wichita. So we've got about 12 or 13 offices statewide, and they filter it out where it goes. We are all about expungements. That's a big thing they're pushing in a lot of other offices. We've got one pro bono coordinator. Her name is Christy Campbell. So basically, wherever you are in the state, if you're wanting to do some sort of expungement drive or expungement workshop, email me, talk to me. I'll send if I have access to open chat here, I'll send my email in there in just a second. And I can connect you with Christy Campbell, because she will do expungement workshops where she tells people what to do, and then try to find local people in the legal community to sit down for maybe 2 or 3 hours and screen applicants and determine first, are you eligible for an expungement? Is the crime you were convicted of eligible for expungement, period? Some of them aren't. Sex offenses, you don't get to expunge that. Murder, probably don't get to expunge that. And then how long does it take for you to qualify for an expungement? Generally it's 3 years. Depending on the offense, it might be 5. And have you paid off your fines? Because if you haven't, then you can't get it expunged yet. And then there's the whole process of filing and stuff, which KLS can help people with. But probably the first thing for folks who want to get an expungement is, let's sit down and figure out if you qualify first, because they don't know those barriers like Susan has pulled up here.
There we go.
And so I'll put my email in there, but we have an outreach person who could help with expungements in your area. She works across the state, and so I can connect you. But I'll yield to Susan and thank her for doing this presentation and inviting me, and Laura for doing most of the help since I was busy during all the times we met.
Yeah, we would get emails from Jeremy as I'm stuck in a Zoom waiting room for court.
Death by Zoom, people. I'm trapped, absolutely trapped. And some of you can turn your cameras on, looking at all these dark faces. That's up to you, your comfort level.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all.
I've been in, I don't know how many activities on Zoom, GoToMeeting, you name it, and usually they're for relaxation after hours, and people, the moderators say, "Turn your cameras on." And it's like, "Oh, honey, no. Mm-mm. I've had my camera on all day. I am not turning it on." So, yeah, we will go on to the barriers that Laura touched on this a bit, but and I'll go ahead and ask assumptions, because you guys are talking about this. What are the barriers and what are our assumptions? Because we tend to have one lens from our worldview, but what is it like for someone who has a conviction they need to have expunged? We may not understand it from their point of view. So we have to stop and think and maybe look at it from their perspective. So one barrier.
So some of the barriers I think Jeremy talked about is people don't know if they're even eligible for expungement, or when are they eligible for expungement. So I think one of the first steps that we can use to go past that barrier is just some basic education, some informative sheets. And the problem is I think that some of it is just a fear of the legal system, a fear that they're just not going to understand, that it's overwhelming. And so I think if we can make it very clear, provide them very clear information, concise information. And then the other thing is they may not even remember what exactly crime they were convicted of. I just remember reading in Leavenworth that a gentleman had been convicted, I think 40 years earlier, and he wanted an expungement before he passed. He wanted it off his record. And so some of it is, do they remember what crime it is? Because the petition that they have to fill out is very specific about date of conviction, crime of conviction, that type of thing. And so that's another barrier, is how do they get that information? How do they get their case number? They're not going to remember a case number from 5-6 years back, maybe 10 years back. So, and because going virtual for courts or going online for courts has been great for some of us that work in the legal field, but for people needing to access information, and especially with COVID right now, it's difficult to just walk in and get what you need. They may not be able to do that right now. They may not have transportation to do that, and at some point, some of these steps along the way, also financial barriers, is because each step may cost something. And what I would hope to do is be a liaison in that lack of information, that perhaps I would be able to provide some of that initial information to let them know, because I have access to all that. I have access to every criminal case filed in Lyon County. I have access to case numbers, convictions, everything. So I could foresee being able to help fill that gap for the time being, and helping people move forward, and trying to at least help alleviate that initial barrier. Also, some of the barriers is just, we talk about just being overwhelmed, not even wanting to try because perhaps they don't think there's any way they can get it done. They don't want to do it by themselves. And so I think reaching out to people in this sort of situation, who, number one, may not know they're eligible, number two, may think that it just can't be accomplished by themselves, is letting them know that there are resources out there. And so I think that's some of that is when I talk about doing an expungement drive is, and post COVID as well, when we're opened back up and people are going to their normal places, is I think some of that basic information could be provided to libraries and librarians, just like Jeremy's giving us this information today about resources that are available for the foreseeable future. And so if librarians have this information, they might be able to do a flyer that sits up on a bulletin board, or someone may think to come and ask them, and because of this information, well, yes, we do know where to send you. And some librarians may already know. I don't want to make any assumptions, but sometimes people just shy away from things in the legal field. And so I just think that there's a way to saturate the communities with the information so people will know. It might start them thinking that, hey, this is available, and I might be able to do this myself. So that would be some of my thoughts about the barriers, how we can maybe overcome them a little bit. And again, just thinking through this whole expungement project that I'm wanting to try to do. So,
Well, and the key there also is the correct information,
yes.
because we also run into the people who think they know, they've been told by someone, and then you can't persuade them otherwise, even though you have the right information. So we want to be out on top of that, out in front with the real deal.
Well, and I think that especially in our community, because I feel like we have a great library. And so we have resources there for people to utilize their technology and things when they're open. So I think maybe
Right.
people also may feel more comfortable approaching a librarian than they don't want to go talk to an attorney because they're afraid it's going to cost them money. Maybe they don't want to get their information from their friends. And so I think people also, and they trust librarians.
Yes, because we too have a code of ethics. And I like to say what happens in the library stays in the library.
Jeremy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that from your side of the desk.
No, I think you guys covered it. I think that covers it. I won't belabor the point.
I think it's important to point out assumptions that we'll still be learning throughout this. I want to know when Christy comes to Emporia or goes anywhere in the state and she advertises the expungement drive, like they're having it in Salina now, but it's virtual through the 30th, through tomorrow. What kind of turnout, what kind of, how many people showed up to take advantage of it? And if it's lower attendance than expected, the why. That's what I want, but then that's the researcher in me. And I'm not sure I can find someone to fund that research project. I would love for that to be the case. So at this point, I think we can certainly entertain questions. I have added the read more about you. Yes, I put up the Kansas Legal Services URL. And the LSC is where, that's the originating document for where I get 60 million Americans in poverty and the access to justice gap. And why, and they were the co-sponsors of the Web Junction course, the development of that. And the link for the Web Junction course that is available now, self-paced. And I'm sure since they're just now advertising it available in October, I hope they extend that next month as well. And then there's going to be a train the trainer session, I think starting in February on this topic. So librarians can train other librarians in their library how to handle this, because I just see more of a need, and I think it's wonderful if we can get this right and empower people with information. As one of my friends loves to say, information is power, and it absolutely is. Now we stand for questions, and yes, we are under time, but we're used to being concise, aren't we, kids? Oh, I do want to make one point. If you didn't catch it earlier, Laura is a prosecutor. Jeremy is defense. Now, that should blow y'all's minds. It just proves, it goes against what we see on TV. Prosecutors mean, defense attorneys, angels, not necessarily.
Every day I tell Laura, let my people go. Let my people go.
And sometimes she does.
Sometimes she does, yeah.
Because Laura's very fair-minded, but see, that's the point. Attorneys, the reason why attorneys get a little uptight about self-help is not that they want to make a buck, because we know you guys are not exactly swimming in riches. It is because we know you can give up rights that you have if you make a mistake. And if you're not familiar with the system, the chance of you making a mistake is pretty high. So we want the best for you. That's why this makes us nervous. We also don't want anyone doing the unauthorized practice of law, because you're not going to dig the long-term effects of that. That's not cool. So let's do it right, get the right information, get with the right people. Okay, we stand for questions. And I'll mute myself now.
While folks are maybe composing their questions, this is Rhonda. I'll jump in with one. We have at least 2 schools of law in Kansas that I know of, here at Washburn in Topeka and at KU, and probably some resources in the Kansas City area I'm not aware of. Do those institutions have resources for pro se?
A little bit. There's really 3 law schools in Kansas, although technically it's 2. There's Washburn in Topeka, KU in Lawrence, and then Kansas City, University of Missouri, Kansas City has a law school, which is technically in Kansas City, Missouri, but that's the sort of place where people there generally it's often very common for them to have licenses to practice in Kansas and Missouri, which you're just going to if you live in that geographic area, because it all blends together. They all have law clinics. They all have law clinics and different law clinic programs. And of course, they're limited in what they can do. The idea of a law clinic is the law student is effectively helping you under special rule that they're being supervised by another attorney, which is the faculty member. And so they'll have some family law clinics. They'll have some like taxes law clinic. Like that's not uncommon where people get help with their taxes at a law clinic. They'll sometimes do things like adoptions. And I can't recall off the top of my head if there is a specific expungement, like a law clinic at KU, Washburn, or UMKC. I don't recall one when I was in law clinic in Topeka at Washburn. That doesn't mean there isn't one. But they have some resources there. Like they're not going to do anything like a contested domestic custody hearing. It's going to be kind of the simple stuff. But they do have those resources. And so there are absolutely some services there for people who need them. Susan, can I show that graph? You're muted.
Yeah, and I used to be able to hit my space bar, kind of like a press to talk, and it wasn't responding.
Yeah, I think if I show this, this might be interesting to look at, folks.
Can I make you a co-host?
I think you'll have to, because I don't have screen sharing
But
capabilities.
I can't. Rhonda needs to make you a co-host.
Yep, I just did.
Okay, you're a co-host.
Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yeah, this is nifty, and I think Susan has this. Someone in our office made this, or someone somewhere made it with more graphic design skills than I will ever have. But in order to qualify for an expungement in Kansas, okay, that's for Kansas. People are coming to you for help, and they're like, I got convicted in Missouri. Do I qualify for an expungement? Don't call KLS. I can't help you. Laura can't help you. You got to go look at your legal aid organizations there. And a lot of states have multiple legal aid organizations. Kansas has a lot of rural community in it, and so we really have one. But if you go into Missouri, there's a bazillion different ones broken up in each part of the state. Like in New York, there's a bazillion, and so on and so on. But to be eligible for an expungement, it has to be an eligible offense, which means it can't be any of these nasty crimes right here. Okay, you can't expunge this under law, no dice, all right? And in order to qualify for the expungement, the required amount of time that's set by statute, by law, has to pass. 3 years for traffic infractions, cigarette or tobacco, misdemeanors, a D or E felony, which is the severity level, And then level 6 through 10 non-drug crimes, level 4 or 5 drug crimes, which are basically low-level felony offenses. 5-year wait time for class A, B, or C felony. I assume that's referencing the conviction and the criminal history of the defendant, but basically, you know, it's a little tougher here.
Pre-sentencing guidelines.
Yeah, and pre-sentencing guidelines. We may
Yeah,
not use some of these
1993.
terms now, but
Yeah.
somebody had a conviction in 90 and the laws changed, we still have to use that set there.
Mhm.
And then no felony convictions within the last 2 years and no pending felony charges. Court then says, okay, you're eligible. You've paid off all the fines on your case. That's generally going to be across the board requirement with some rare exceptions. Some judges will throw people a bone, like in drug court here in Lyon County. If you graduate, Fowler, I think, will just waive any fees you owe the court or something like that. Not every judge is that nice, but let's assume you've passed all those steps. You're at step 4 and you've paid your fines. Then the court asks the question, okay, you qualify, but are you eligible? Should you be granted one? You know, and then they have to determine that your circumstances and behavior warrant expungement. You know, maybe this person has had no felony convictions in the last 2 years, but they've been arrested for domestic battery twice. I would tell them to save their filing fee until some time has passed. And then the court has to say, hey, is expunging this consistent with the public welfare? And if you can get up over all of those hurdles, yay, you get an expungement. And so this is actually really helpful, I think, this part right here for lay people to kind of look and have a visual to say, am I even eligible? Well, this is a visual graph, and so it's pretty easy to find what your conviction was and then kind of match it up. And so I just wanted to share that resource because I thought it, you know, it's easy to read.
One thing that how we do it here in Lyon County, going along with what Jeremy says, all these steps, is one of the first steps that they do is and it doesn't matter whether they're represented by counsel or whether they're doing the expungement themselves, is the request comes to our office and we look at it and we check it, make sure, is it okay, you know, do we agree that this should be expunged? And if we agree to that, that person doesn't have to come to court. All we do is we sign off on the order and it goes directly to the court. And so a lot of times, as long as prosecutor's office doesn't object and the court doesn't see anything as to reason why they should not sign it, that person can get their expungement without even having to step foot in a courtroom.
So I have a question. I was a little late. I'm sorry if this was already covered. Can people only get one thing expunged, or can more than one offense be expunged?
More than one offense can be expunged. And that depends on the type of case it was. Say if you had a case where they were convicted of 2 charges in the same case, that would be one expungement, as long as both crimes were eligible to be expunged. Or a person may have multiple cases. Say it was someone who, you know, had a drug issue when they were younger, and they've got, you know, 1 or 2 possession cases that are that they were convicted of. They can still get each of those expunged. They have to just do separate procedures for each one. And that was another thing that I think is a barrier, is the cost of multiple cases being expunged.
Right.
And so something I've also been trying to brainstorm of how can we get around that cost. But yes, they're able to do more than just one.
Yeah, in Lyon County, a basic filing fee, at least for most of the work I do on domestic cases, is like $197. If you're very poor, though, there should still be a way to file a poverty affidavit and say, hey, my income is so low, judge, you should waive this fee for me to file this case, this expungement, because the idea then is if you don't, well, then we're creating a financial barrier so that only people with money can use and benefit the court system, which is supposed to be for everyone. But, you know, think of it though, like even imagine if you made decent enough money that you don't qualify for that and you've got 3 convictions, one in Woodson County, one in Lyon County, one in Leavenworth County. That's 3 different cases, possibly 3 different attorneys if you have to hire an attorney to do it. You know, and in our situation here, when we do an expungement and we send it to the prosecutors to review and they say, this is gravy, sign off, we submit the order, paper hearing, boom. Okay, when you're paying an attorney $100, $150, maybe $200 an hour, But that county and that prosecutor do the more formal thing where you actually go to court and they say no objection, and the judge says, okay, pound the gavel. Well, now that person, that defendant getting the expungement, has just paid an attorney a whole lot of money to basically be there physically, which is a fair charge. But when you're being charged $150 an hour for that, it's pretty expensive. It's a lot cheaper when Laura and I just work it out and the judge says this is cool. And so that financial cost can really climb up, even for a person who makes good money, allegedly, can really be big.
And frankly, I just don't think it shouldn't matter how much money you make. Financial considerations should not be a barrier to your access to the courts.
Yep.
It doesn't matter whether you can so-called afford it or not. That's not the purpose of the courts. And so, sorry, that's a little bit of a bandwagon for me.
Access to justice.
So,
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about.
Any other questions, folks?
There's got to be questions. Do any of our attendees have experience with self-help litigants that they'd like to share? That they want suggestions on how to deal with?
and
War
Susan,
stories?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna put up my email in the chat, just in case I know Jeremy did his, and then if they have any questions or something for me, then they will have that available to them.
Good idea. And I will also share my screen quickly to show our website, which is currently the de facto where you can find streaming court cases. I think you can see, I hope you can see Lyon County Law Library. We used our splash page to show our cases that are being, I think courtroom 2 might have something. Right now we're using YouTube. Nope, that one's over. But because if I click on this, it's going to show us that.
Judge Fowler.
Yep.
On November 20th at 2 o'clock.
And we've got a problem with
Arraignment will be conducted at that
YouTube.
time.
For one thing, it doesn't listen when I tell it to quit. But that's not all we have. We have all of these other good things. I put up the COVID-19 place for, especially when it was brand new, getting as much information out as we could. Here's where we're going to put our expungement guidelines, because as great as I like that visual, still need to break it down some more. Number one, know what you were convicted for and know your case number. I mean, we're going to make it simple, super, super simple. And then we have links to our forms. Kansas Legal Services has done a fantastic job doing an interactive for just about any situation. If you have, well, question about a divorce, and this is how I've been handling, whether it's attorney or a public patron question. I share my screen through GoToMeeting because that's the subscription the law library has. And we walk through these questions together. And I show them my screen, and it's like I ask questions and we suss it out together. The biggest thing with self-help litigants is teasing out how many questions they actually have, because they'll start with one, and by the time I break it down, it's actually 7 or 8. So it's like, okay, which one do you want to focus on? But we have the free legal forms, but you can see that just here, you can pick a question and it will walk you through. You answer these questions and it will direct you where you need to go. And then at some point, like divorce with children, stop. You need an attorney. And the attorney really isn't for you necessarily, but for your kids. And oh, by the way, don't lie to the court. If you have underage children and you're seeking a divorce, do not tell the court you don't have children. Never lie to the court. I'll just put it that way. Just don't lie to the court.
Susan, we did have a chat question come in.
Oh, good.
Noelle works for the Wichita Public Library. One of our most frequent requests is for, quote, the form to file for child custody. Often this is a grandparent who needs custody of a child whose parent is in jail. Does such a form exist? I've looked all over KLS and DC 18 and never found anything.
No.
Yeah.
You don't just write a ticket and get the baby. That's not how that works. So if, well, gosh, I'm trying to think how to answer that. I mean, there's probably a way to get like an emergency placement order through a domestic case, but I don't think your normal pro se litigant would be able to understand the motion to file, the service to process, and the notice and do all that stuff. That's really something you need an attorney for. If there's no parent and the kid's in jail, probably have a system with a point where the state's going to get involved and then they can determine custody. Laura, how would you answer that?
Well, I know for a couple of different things, there are forms that are available for the situation where you have custody of someone else's child. And if it's not to be where maybe a grandparent is concerned about providing medical care in the event of an emergency, or being able to go to the school. I do know actually, because I sent my child on a vacation with someone else, is that actually your emergency rooms will have a form that you can call and get for that someone other than a parent can consent to medical treatment.
Yeah.
And so actually,
I think you can basically get a power of attorney to make medical decisions and such.
I don't know that you would probably know better than me, but I think the power of attorney is usually for the person who signs a form saying yes. I'm not familiar with that concept. I just know that I was able to get a form from the emergency room that I was able to send with my child. And so there are those for medical care that you don't have to go through a legal professional to get.
Yeah.
So, it might only be worth the paper that it's written on, but it is a form that can give you some peace of mind that they should be able to at least get medical care if the need arises when you're not a parent, as long as the parent signs the form.
But do grandparents have custody rights?
But here's how I would answer that. So what I've seen happen when in cases where children are in state custody or even divorces or just custody cases, whatever the concept. Oftentimes I've seen people who just kind of dump the kiddo on a family member who's like, okay, I'll take the kid. And they sign something like Laura is talking about, made you a Jennifer, Laura, that Laura is talking about, where you give them basically permission to make medical decisions, to show up at the doctor, take them to the ER and get their prescriptions and stuff. That's not the same thing as having legal custody over a child, residential custody.
We're talking guardianship.
You're talking, what you're really talking about in a situation where parents are gone, whatever circumstance, and they're not there, and you need a permanent order that says you're the person who's effectively in loco parentis, you're the parent, right? By all reality. Then you can file a petition for guardianship. It says basically you are their guardian, you make decisions about their day-to-day care and stuff, their medical care, and provide for them. Common examples would be a disabled child who's now 18, now is legally an adult, but that child is so disabled that you as the parent are going to be taking care of that child as if they were a minor their whole life. And so that guardianship gives you that sort of permanent legal right to be, for lack of a better description, their parent. There's also a conservatorship. Oftentimes people will file for a guardianship and a conservatorship, and they're different. Guardianship means I have that right to make decisions about your care and effectively kind of, run your life like a parent might their child. Conservatorship means I have the right to take care of all of your money, your finances, pay your bills, and receive your Social Security funds, to make sure you're taken care of, your Social Security disability funds to make sure you're taken care of, and that requires you to file forms and track the money to prevent fraud. And those are two different things. So, you might have a situation where, like what I just described with the disabled child who becomes 18 and now someone has to manage their money. You don't just want to be their guardian, you want to be their conservator. If you just want to have guardianship over a minor until they're old enough to go to college and do their own thing, you probably don't want to be their conservator. You want to be their guardian. And there is I mean, you can file that without an attorney. I will just say it is so complicated for a layperson that probably would not be productive. It'd be difficult. But in that situation, I think what they're looking for is filing for a petition for guardianship. And a lot of the times what you'll see in these situations, I see it all the time with children in state custody, the parents create some sort of thing that says, I signed an affidavit in front of a notary, the notary stamps it that says, you get to be parent of my child. That's not how that works. It's not like a Monopoly card. You can't just write that on paper and transfer it around and shuffle it. You know, people do that and it certainly shows an intent. That's not binding or even grounded in law. You'll see stuff like that. If you're looking for guardianship, like you said in the chat, they need to look at a petition for guardianship, and they can look at KLS has good resources online. That's the magic word to type there, guardianship. That's where you would go.
Right. That's a very good question. Oh, we've got 2 other new messages. Oh, that was it. Yes. Yeah, so we have time for another question, maybe, if there are any. One thing I will say about forms, I get a lot of requests for forms, and we are getting standardized forms from the Supreme Court. Well, I will call it the Supreme Court. It's actually the Kansas Judicial Center or Council. You can go, if you search Kansas Supreme Court, you'll find the link there. You'll also find it through our self-representation link or page on our website. And that came about the same time KLS did their lovely interactive website. And so these are forms that will be accepted by district courts across the state. What we had a problem with before is that each court would have its own form, and somebody might get one from one district and it wouldn't translate to another, or the bigger nightmare, they might buy forms from an office supply store and try to use those, and they wouldn't be accepted by anyone. So there are some forms, but the reality is some of them have to be written by an attorney because the law does change glacially, but it changes. And you're responsible for making sure that this is still applicable law and the most current. So go to the KLS or the state Supreme Court sources first. If you don't find what you're looking for, then yes, you're going to need to consult an attorney. Forms they're not like the IRS tax forms.
Yeah, and there's also the, if you're looking for base forms, templates, you can also go to the Kansas Judicial Branch website. I can't recall if you mentioned that, Susan.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's what she's talking about. And you can find a lot of stuff there. But they're going to kind of just dump the forms on you. It's not really going to be like, okay, you filed a petition, then you have to serve it, then you have to get the return of service on file. Right. Then you file a notice and do a notice of hearing and then email it or send it out to everyone. And it doesn't do that for you. It just sort of gives you the paperwork.
Right. And knowing the process, that's what I'm talking about. It is complex. Knowing the process is very important. Yeah, very good, Laura. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, a virtual round of applause for our presenters, Susan, Jeremy, and Laura. Thank you so much for joining us today and helping us navigate, or helping us help our patrons navigate the world of self-representation. I'm going to turn off the recording at this point. The room will be open for a few more minutes, but then we're going to close it for the state librarian's luncheon. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.